this is a quick summary of the discussion groups that I facilitated at the APMG Showcase event on Friday the 19th of June 2015, where our subject under discussion was excellence in change management and how to create excellence in change management. So we started off by talking about what is excellence. So we put the synonyms up for excellence on perfection and brilliance and supremacy and quality and eminence and greatness. So we know that we're trying to aim for something rather sort of high-end here, that we want the best. So we're not just, can we manage a bit of change, but are we really good at it? So that's what the conversation was all about, our discussion. And I started the ball rolling by talking about some of the critical success factors that I think help an organisation become really good at change. And then the rest of the group pitched in with their ideas. So let me take you through some of these. Understanding the enormity, the sheer scale of what's involved if you're going to manage change effectively. Making senior managers role model the changes and not just commit to them in terms of maybe doing a few presentations, but actually doing the behaviours that they're asking everybody else to exhibit. Building an internal capability for change. Maybe it's a methodology, maybe it's a framework or approach. There's a toolkit. There's training and coaching. Those support activities have been worked out. So we actually think about how do we get good at this thing. We create an environment of innovation, so we support ongoing change, and we make sure that change management is as recognised a management discipline as other things like financial management, supervisory skills, project management. And lastly, we get that rate of success up. As somebody said in one of the groups, currently a lot of the research from McKinsey, from HBR, etc., talk about a 30% success rate for change initiatives. Surely we can do better, and certainly a 30% rate is not success. Let me have a look at some of these in more detail. What was this about understand the enormity of the task? And I think one of the things we felt was that really good change management can't be done unless it's properly resourced, unless there's the time allowed to do it. So if senior managers don't understand just how informed and how involved the work is, then they're not going to allow us to have the time to get on and do it. One of the things I shared with the group was that, having been doing this for more than 20 years, an experience that the initial duration of a change initiative, whatever sort of senior managers say within the next year perhaps, multiply it by 3. Because that's a pretty good rule of thumb, that usually it takes about 3 times as long to actually embed the change and make it the new normal than we're actually given. We talked in the discussion groups about some of the theories around why this is the case. And one of these was that an awful lot of executives tend to concentrate on change as a sort of structural, tangible deliverable. So we have a project where we have the idea comes in here, and what comes out of the project is the outputs, the deliverables. We even talked about, if it was an Agile project, that those would come out throughout the life of the project. But it doesn't matter if your project has been run under waterfall or Agile approaches. At the end of the day, a project creates new deliverables that have to be implemented to become the new norm. So that triggers the change curve. And one of the things we talked about was that this experience that people have about learning new ways of working, practicing them, making mistakes, having another go, and it becoming then normal for them, and no longer a change, takes a lot of time. And it's incredibly difficult to work out what that time limit is. Unlike a project where you can come up with a plan that says, for the next 6 months, we will be developing these things. So I think a lot of the problems around enormity of the task is that people look at the structural, tangible part of a change initiative, here characterised by the project life cycle, and ignore this bit, which is the psychological, behavioural aspects, effectively the change life cycle. So they give us only 1/3 of the time allowed. So that's why we came to a very simplistic, I recognise, but still an important one in terms of making sure that people understand the real duration. So that was one of our things about being excellent. Something else we talked about was the innovation environment and creating that environment of sort of ongoing change. And down here we looked at some of the key factors for that, and we looked at lots of examples of how we do this. The first was a recognition that if you want people to consistently come up with ideas for change, then it's all around how they share information across their organisation and also how they bring the outside world in, so they find out what's happening in the outside world. So I shared an example of how I've now got some executives in a very sort of silo-based organisation to be going to lunch together every couple of weeks because it just demonstrates to their staff within each of their silos that if the directors are allowed to sort of talk quite publicly to each other, they're all meeting in the canteen, then maybe information sharing across these lower levels would be a great idea. So this is also tackling that idea of role modelling the change. But it's also, how do we get ideas to keep flowing? Well, part of it is you have to share ideas, share information, and that's where your innovation comes from. The second part of that is actually creating an environment where anyone can suggest an idea. I made everybody laugh by one of the guys I'm coaching. He wakes up every morning and he just issues instructions. He's that kind of person. He doesn't draw breath. He's always, what's next, what's next? And I'm just trying to get him to think about how he comes across, because he really does discourage people from sharing their own thoughts. So I've now got him to sort of practice saying, that's a really interesting idea. Thanks for sharing. And it doesn't come naturally to him, but it is actually about creating that environment, that recognition that anyone can share an idea and that it's welcomed and will be treated with respect. A part of that is if you have ideas for change, that you understand what the evaluation criteria are. I'm not talking necessarily about a very large sort of business case style evaluation, but just some key criteria that if your idea matches some of those things, maybe it's been worth considering. And then we get into the fact that we need to keep it quite light touch, that before we sort of get people to document their idea in detail and do a big business case, maybe we should pilot things and do feedback and understand how it might work in practice with a small test group before we go into the full rollout. But as I said, this idea of an innovation environment is part of that ongoing excellence in change management. We didn't want to just look at how we could run a particular transformation excellently, but how excellence in change management permeates every part of the organisation, including this culture. Which is why, in the next part, we moved on to how do we deal with cultural change and recognising that actually becoming excellent in change management is a cultural change. So, we had a look at some of the most common models for cultural change, and a lot of them have three sort of elements to them. So we took that. There's lots of language around cultural change, which we simplified, and we said that if you want to make cultural change happen, first of all, make it very visible. Have things in place that people notice, that shows that you prioritise and you value and you think changing and managing change and implementing, these are all important things to your organisation. So we had suggestions about putting a change management office very clearly in the organisation structure. We talked about including the importance of innovation, creativity and managing change as responsibilities within a job description. I shared an example of one chief executive I know who is so keen to make change normal in his organisation that before any job description can be released to a recruitment agency when they're hiring, he makes sure that there is a paragraph in there about the importance of being ready for change, because he's trying to drive that through. We then looked at the second layer of cultural change, which is things we do, the norms, the behaviours, the practices. And a couple of great ideas from change managers that I know. One, all projects must have a change delivery plan. So effectively what we're talking about is we're talking about this idea of, well, actually it's not just the project, but we're actually, if I go all the way back here, that there must be a change delivery plan that shows how the project deliverables will be implemented. And another idea, one of the norms that we should encourage, is that no project can go live unless a change readiness assessment has come out positively. Are people who are going to be asked to use this new deliverable, a system or a process, have they actually been trained? Are they aware of the go live date? Have they told their customers about it? So all of that change readiness is essential. And then lastly, and we know this comes from sort of senior management commitment, we know this comes from storytelling, we know this comes from having a vision, but it's this core belief. And we need to encourage a core belief. And there were lots of suggestions for wording around this, but things around innovation and change is vital to our survival. Change is the only way to stay ahead. Everyone else is changing, we'll get left behind. But actually having those kinds of conversations in the organisation so that change becomes a core belief, its importance is core. And we think that if we do all of those things, then we'll actually create an environment of excellence for change management.